What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, blues people? Trying to get, for whatever reason, the Instagram is not working. So we're going to get out of there because I don't want to hold up what we're trying to do for one location when y'all great folk rock with me in this location. We're also going to see who's coming in. Hey, what's happening with you a little bit? I like that. I got a new little apparatus, and that new little apparatus shows on the top or on the bottom right. You know, I want y'all to read that while we're waiting for people to come in and push this out. Blues Music is Black History is a hard conversation at Hopson Plantation. You know, I was asked to go out there, see what the vibe is. And hey, what's going on, good sister Nia? Thank you for joining. You know, I'm gonna call out the show when more people come. You know that, right? But thank you for being here, good sister. We trying to wait for some folk to come in. We had a nice time in Mississippi. I just think it's something that needs to be discussed. So we're going to discuss it. I think it's a very good conversation. And while we're live, I'm just making sure the right folks are going to be rocking with us. Okay? My sister, I like that. All right. Even though I like to try to wait for folk, I think we're just gonna go for it. And one of the reasons, I always have my notes, but I want to look at my people's. I always have my notes, but I want to look at my people's. Let me open up my laptop real quick because we really. I don't know what. I just got a text. Hold on. I'll open that in a second. The reason why I opened up my laptop because I like to make sure if there's information I may not have, I can just go straight there and type it up real quick. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's something that we all should do, right? Particularly if people look at us as information sources, all right? So now, first of all, let me just tell you to check out my good sister. She has a radio program, Sonic Blackness, and I'm going to highlight her a couple of times throughout the evening. And anybody else from my tribe that jumps on, I always love to share the love. So we're going to talk about. Let me see what's going on here because I'm getting a lot of texts. Okay. So I want to make sure y'all know what's going on. What we're talking about today, and I'm going to let it scroll on the bottom for a little bit. Because as we come to an end of Black Music History Month, I thought it would make sense be impactful, of course, and just simply a good idea to discuss not just the blues ecology, but the hard conversations that should be had, that are in some cases had, and that in this case it was actually had. So I was invited to Pinetop Perkins Foundation has a camp. What I'm gonna do right now is make sure that you guys could find the information. I'm gonna put it up on a banner right now. Okay. So Pinetop Perkins has an organization. He's passed on, and that organization functions very well. Actually, you should look them up. They have camps, annual camps, and I mean, honestly, all types of programming throughout the year. My youngsters go there, and they've met some great friends there. We've met great friends there, Mrs. Pearley and I. Excuse me. And man, and I paused a little bit because so I was asked to give a presentation on the purpose of blues, or better yet, how the blues people and plantations are connected. Really, right? The history, the folklore, the idea of why these things connected, and what should people understand participating in any blues or black traditional event in any of these spaces. And for what it's worth, any event, whether it's non-black, whether it's Anglo, whether it's Mexicano, whatever it is, um, what does that mean? Why is it sensitive, right? Um, well, I mean, we met there, right? I love what they do for kids as well. And what I also loved was the fact that they understood this conversation needed to be had, right? Um, they understood the conversation needed to be had. And I mean, for what it's worth, just to get straight to one side of it, the musicianship is phenomenal. The music teachers, the musicians, the young musicians, it's man, beyond reproach. Don't get me wrong. Um, and I told them, like I'm telling you all, and I tell everybody, I just did not know how to receive this. My initial couple of times going, having roots in the South, but yet growing up in the Northeast, I, you know, but as a blues uh, folklorist, if you will, and a blues practitioner, I just feel so many ways about so many things of this situation, and then having the honor and the blessing to speak to a multitude of people on all sides of the board. And when I say all sides of the board, not just black, not just white, but in different classes, in different socioeconomic classes. That I mean, and also different educational classes. Um, the idea of plantation is different for some people. Maybe not different. I think they all have the same understanding, but it functions different. Which brings me to a couple of things, right? So what ended up happening was, and I spoke to the triple quadruple OG Billy Branch, and I spoke to Liz and David and a few other people. And so what ended up happening was part of my presentation was to interview Mr. And mind you, the event, we have footage of the event. I will be sharing it, as will Pinetop Perkins Foundation will be sharing it. It was I curated quite a few emotional uh, events. I think this one by far was, uh, when I say easily consumable, it didn't need a chaser. So just so you know, this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Jump in, engage, but this is what we're going to be discussing tonight and how it has to do with the blues. I'll give you guys, for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a quick rundown of who the legend Pinetop Perkins is. I'll repeat on a few occasions about the actual foundation, which he started. And to be clear, and give some background context, be clear, this plantation, Hopson Plantation, is where Pinetop, is from there. And what this was something he wanted to do. So he started the foundation with a few people. And from that point on, this is what's been going on. I spoke to some great teachers there and people. And one of their concerns was the idea that it's a Black cultural expression hosted on a space that has a very complex relationship and history with Black folk, yet the lack of Black participation was one of the things expressed to me, which is just growing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, even Kingfish went there, So, but it wasn't, at least for those couple of years, from what was expressed to me. So there was this also idea that along with that, this peculiar relationship of the Jim Crow South, plantation life, and the blues on the space. How do we discuss this? Does it need to be discussed? Should those that participate in this program even hear this? And the consensus was yes. And they thought I was the right person to lead this conversation. So first and foremost, thank you for entrusting something as such to me. I hope I did, or I hope it was what you foresaw, right? Um, I believe it was. We left as as it was, but I don't like. So just on the sidebar, someone asks me, so how was your presentation? How was your performance? Or how was your this or that? Anyone who knows me or asks me that, I always say, ask the audience. I don't know. Because it's really what the y'all say. And I do know leaving there was some great reactions to it. And I mean, I've also, and Justin, I'm going to read your statement in a second. I also had the opportunity to curate a family reunion between the descendants of the enslaver and the enslaved, and a lot of them were related. So I'll say it again: the descendants of the enslaver and the enslaved, and a lot of them were related. That was a much more complex and emotional than discuss. Well, and it's all the blues. It's all relative, but that one was a little bit more. what's the good word? Passionate. So this is passionate as well. There is a problematic romanticizing of perceived primitive nature and suffering of early blues musicians, unintentional, but problematic nonetheless. I like that statement a lot. I like that statement a lot because I've come to find out a lot of these things that we see, read, hear, and find out in some cases, or even, I don't want to say most, but in a lot of cases, are non malice, unintentional. Um, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about intentional exploitation outside of how blues functions within land, labor, and sound and interaction and things of this nature, right? So to your point, Justin, that was one of the reasons we had to have this conversation. There is a nostalgia, not just, and I speak about this often. The nostalgia is not just based on these primitive, what we call nowadays magical Negroes, right? But the nostalgia also is on the conditions. I give this example a lot, where this white gentleman says to me, as we're talking about Charlie Patton and Southern House and all these folk from Dockery Plantation, he said, "Hey, don't you wish you was on a plantation with Charlie Patton just playing and picking?" And I said, "Hell no. No, I do not." Okay? I did not then, I do not now. Plantation is different now. What's up, young Don? What's going on, man? Um, it's different now, to some degree, but I didn't want to go then, and I don't necessarily want to live there now. So I'm showing this picture, right? So on my right, with three people, there's a gentleman in a Chicago hat. That's Mr. Bob Strozier. He is a blues legend. Um, he actually grew up and lived and worked on a plantation. He's a blues musician, and we were able to have a discussion, and I was able to ask him some questions as I gave my uh, presentation. So in the middle, that is Jill, who uh, was part of the team of Pinetop Perkins Foundation. The next picture is me, Mrs. Pearley Jr., who takes harmonica. He's part of the harmonica program there. There's Liz with Jill, who has a great pine top shirt on, and she I believe she's the executive director, and her and David does great things. And I mean, I keep kind of stuttering looking at this picture because I remember that's when we found out about a dear friend of ours we share in common. In the middle of that picture, above my wife, Mrs. Pearley, you would see Candace Ivory, who is a blues. She's a singer. So first of all, she's a generational singer. Let's just get that straight. But she's also a blues diva, if you will, and she's legendary already. And I want to be clear. You know, her and man, Tony and Ben, so many people that are teaching there. Billy Branch, um, all the Bobs. These are legendary musicians that not only my kids, but the youngsters that participate in this, they're on stage with legendary blues musicians as they learn their craft. I mean, it is some remarkable stuff, right? LJ and Sammy performed with Candace Ivory, as did Hayden is another young harpist. He's played with her a few times, if I'm not mistaken. It's quite, I can't call everybody up. Young Rel, is there. He was a student. Now I believe he's interning as a teacher. Um, you know, great young brother, you know what I'm saying, who's making his way. I spoke about him a little bit last week when discussing who's holding it now, pushing it forward now. But I want, so first, let's start with this. Who's Pinetop Perkins? Okay, so Pinetop Perkins, full name Joe Willie Pinetop Perkins. He was born in 1913 and he transcended in 2011. Okay. He's what's called a blues pianist, and he was a hell of a pianist. You know, he was influenced obviously by uh, Cal Davenport and all the great ones from the, you know, but he also influenced many people. He influenced rock and roll, right? He received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award and an induction into the Blues Hall of Fame. Okay, actually, a good friend of mine, Miss Carla Robinson, the good friends of the Pearleys, introduced us to this camp. In her work in the region, making sure blues musically and culturally has the life it's supposed to have, and also making sure that young African American kids are accessible to these type of things, right? Pardon me, I'm drinking the happy coffee Mrs. Pearley sells. Make sure you contact me if you want some. So Pinetop was born in Belzoni, Mississippi, and he was raised on a plantation in Honey Island, Mississippi. Okay. He began his career as a guitarist, injured his tendons in his left arm in a knife fight with a chorus girl in Helena, Arkansas. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Clarksdale, Belzoni, and I mean just Holly Springs, the North Hill country, and a lot of these places, it's really juxtaposed. It's really right next to Helena, Arkansas. Helena, Arkansas is where the King Biscuit is held. And man, my I've played in festivals and different cultural events, but my, you know, like high tier entry to blues festival as a performer was King Biscuit actually last year. And Pinetop Perkins students played and had a stage there, and they move around, is what I'm saying. So in the 1940s, he gets into a knife fight with a chorus girl in Helena, Arkansas, which injures his tendons, and I guess that hinders his guitar career, and he picks up the piano. Okay, and so he plays. You know, he plays with Sonny Boy. He rocks on Robin Nighthawk's radio. You know, he does the circuit, if you will. You know, he's part of Muddy Waters band when he replaced Otis Spann, and at this time he relocates to Illinois, right? And he does quite a few things. You know, I mean, I'm just giving you a quick rundown because at the end of the day, this guy's a legend, and it's really easy to find his information, right? I just wanted to give you guys a brief summary of who he is, but I'm a little bit more focused on the program. Now, as we get to the program, just to be clear, Pinetop started playing blues in the mid to late 20s. Okay. And that is something that needs to be said specifically because we're talking about someone who was playing during the early inception of this as a recording industry, not just medicine shows, not just minstrels, not just vaudevilles, not just burlesques, and how do you say um not just burlesques and not just Storyville in New Orleans, right? Uh we're talking about when the recording industry began recording black music, right? We're not just talking about when sheet music was the king and queen of the music industry. We're talking about when Mamie Smith records Crazy Blues, goes platinum, right? And this may be this is during the migration, by the way. So you have to see everything that's going on here. This is during a migration, okay? This is during the migration, okay? This is when he's starting out. So ultimately, what I'm trying to get you guys to see is this is someone who's not just uh, how can I say he was there in the beginning, or so this is a real legend, right? Now, I want you guys to keep that in mind as we have this conversation, because Bob Strozier at 94 or possibly 95 comes from this era as he being an older gentleman, he was able to perform with these guys in the early days, as well as understand what living on a plantation means, right? So now, with that being said, the primary mission of the Pinetop Perkins Foundation is to provide encouragement and support for youth and young people at the beginning of their musical career with masterclass workshop experience, and help provide care and safety for elderly musicians at the twilight of their career. Pinetop Assistance League. Okay? Now, I'm gonna look at y'all for a bit. I got some more stuff I want to show y'all as we break this down. Okay, because there's stuff to talk about. And I mean, nothing bad, all good stuff, but I just want to give y'all context. Okay. So there's all kinds. When I say all kinds of people, I don't want to make it sound general, but there's youngsters there, and there's some adults there, and then there's some older adults there, and it's a good community, close knit, you know, and it's really about the music, you know. It's really about the music, and they play at a high level. So now let's get to let me show you how it looks now. This is pretty much how Hopson Plantation and its commissary looks now, right? This is one of the locations that has performances, food, beverages, and there's another one to the right of it, right? This is how it used to look. Okay. There's a picture from the Library of Congress. Okay. This is how it used to look. Now, I'm showing you these things for no other reason but because of like what we did there. We're having the hard conversation. Now, we didn't have any images. We just sat, me and Mr. Strozier, the elder, as we call him, sat in the front of the room of the location I showed you, and I spoke about plantation life, the industry. And let me rephrase that. I didn't speak about plantation life because I didn't grow up on a plantation during this time. I spoke about the plantation industry, the plantation complex. I spoke about how labor, forced labor, free labor, corrupt labor, corruption of land, how that informed the people and how the people took that information and how it informed the blues. Now, again, there's the thing where the blues didn't come from despair, but it comes from fun, party, burlesque, and the like, which the Jelly Roll Morton and the New Orleans story and all this, that is part of it. But there was blues here, there's blues all over, just like there was jazz in Storyville, but there was also jazz in the West Coast. There's a consciousness of black folk, right, that carries throughout existence, region, time, space. We speak of this as blues ecology, right? Just like in the book, The Half Has Never Been Told, where it's documented a writer traveling hears this singing from some black folk in the Northeast, then he hears it in the Southeast, then he hears the same thing in the Deep South, with no confirmation or any reason to believe any of these people had any relations, nor was it necessarily a route where any of these people would end up. Okay. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Because now, mind you, this is in 1940. We're not even talking about Hopson Plantation earlier on, but this is in 1940. These three pictures I just showed you. It was taken by the Library of Congress. Okay. If you want the information, I will. It says Hopson Plantation near Clarksdale, Mississippi Delta, Mississippi. Who is Marion Post Walcott was the photographer. I'm going to look and to see what the project was, why they were he was down there taking pictures at this time. I believe it had to do with what I'm reading so far off the rip. Farm Security Administration, Office of War Information. So it looks like this was some sort of agricultural documentation for whatever, what have you, right? Now, mind you, this is the information right off I didn't go deep into it, but these pictures help tell the story of why it's important, because now I can get to when I was having the discussion and explaining blues ecology, essentially, memory, sound, how even though some people might suggest Big Bill Brunsey was embellishing, there is a different, or better yet, yeah, no, there's a different they farm different in Mississippi, right? You can go to Miss Rhonda Lynn, where I interviewed her, and she broke down Mississippi from top to bottom, where the Delta is, why it's called a Delta, the plain, everything. So this would kind of confirm a different sound in Mississippi than Louisiana, even though a lot of Louisiana, Mississippi is just split by, if anything, a thin river or what have you, right? And a lot of people cross the border all the time. I know that for a fact, just based on my existence, come from my family's crossing those borders, right? So there was a lot of interchangeable things, right? But I just don't want it to be as if there was no blues in this space. Now, this is 1940. Those pictures were taken. So at 1940, we know at this point the blues has electrified in some spaces, sped up in other places, and all kinds of things, right? But it was still in the Delta. So now what does this have to do with anything? This has to do with, I was invited to this space to discuss why this, which is the same location, makes their program, or not their program, what they have to do with each other. Okay, what does the blues and plantation have to do with each other? Why is it significant to know? And I didn't know what to expect, right? I will quote the elder, Mr. Bob Strozier. I knew this place. I know this place. I grew up in a place like this. I worked in a place like this. I know what the shack smells like. I have no interest in going in there or looking in it or smelling it, because I can still smell it. I can still feel what it felt like in those days. And he gave us a first person account of cotton picking, from him to the men, to the women who had a baby strapped on them and they was picking cotton. Because this is a cotton plantation, if I didn't make that clear. So I'm not just yelling picking cotton because that's the stereotypical story of black folk in the Jim Crow South. This is a cotton region. This is a cotton plantation. Cotton still grows there. Okay. So when we go there in the summer, I don't know. The first time we went there, I don't know if it registered to us. We knew the plantation. We knew it was still growing things. I guess we just thought it was produce. And when I say we, my family and I thought nothing. I don't know. I just didn't think they were still growing cotton. And I'm not saying that's an issue. That's still an industry, right? But what I'm saying is it didn't register until we went there in the fall. You know, it was like, wow, we were staying on a cotton plantation. So where blues is being taught now, again, Pinetop wanted folks. He wanted to put together, from what I was told, the organization to have these camps for folk to learn the music. And he worked there. He lived there at Hopson. So that's where they do the camp out of. So I thought, in retrospect, and usually this kind of thing I would discuss in my reflexive podcast on my Patreon, but I learned so much from the elder as we think about blues, and we think about the location that it comes from. These places are timeless dimensions. So we're sitting there in 2025, and everything from the turn of the century to this point is living right there in the space. And he turns around to everyone and says, "But I want y'all to understand that one, love is more important. Two, this is not about race. We did that and we experienced it. I did it and I experienced it." This is what he said. He said, "But you come in to hear us perform and forget about this stuff." And when he said that, I thought about some of the writings of blues by non-blues people and these conditions that we're discussing, that I'm not going too deep into the conditions. I think you all know what the conditions were, right? Exploitative labor, the New Deal, which inspired an even more rigorous space for black folk, because black farmers and poor white farmers were teaming together to unionize and all these things, and the plantation complex wasn't trying to hear that. So they figured out a way to disenfranchise everyone while putting people against each other, you know? So when all this is going on, I would have to imagine a lot of the times the entertainment, if they spoke about that, it was in a entertaining way, right? To make people laugh, dance, not necessarily unless they were protest music, right? Revolutionary music, right? So the elder sat there and was like, "You come into my show, I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about politics in a regular conversation, because I know what you deal with, because I deal with." This is him saying this. So I'm coming to take you away from that. You're coming here, and I'm going to take you away from that. And so that was kind of the focus on how the memory of the place, from what I gather, still is real for him and anyone else in his age range or slightly younger that experienced it, right? So I interviewed an owner of a barbecue spot out in Hill Country, and he was talking to me about how in the 69, 75, 70, in 1969, 1975, these years, people were still working on a plantation, but somewhere around that time, it began to get regulated. So up until that point, it really wasn't regulated. If you think of Fannie Lou, I'm sorry. If you think of Fannie Lou, a lot of this stuff wasn't regulated. And he explains to me in the interview when it becomes regulated, and this is well into the 70s, right? So we're talking about, and this also goes back to when you hear a lot of folks, "Well, why are you talking about that?" or "Leave that in the past," but it's not that far away. The elder Bob Strozier is 94 and 95. Pinetop Perkins was born in 1913 and died in 2011. So a lot of the things that cultivate the blues is not so far removed, and in some cases are still being perpetuated, as you know. Matter of fact, let me look this up. I think I mentioned this to you before, this idea of how some of these businesses are going to what were once slave states and creating these jobs. But it's kind of interesting where they're creating the jobs, how they're creating it, and how the setup sounds like, I guess I want to say a better version of a plantation, but I don't have the right to say that. So I'm not going to say that. Yet and still, what I will say is I kudos to the organization for what they do with young musicians. Always would love to see more Black musicians there, and I'm seeing more. Each year I go, I see more, and then I see a lot of the same, which is a great thing. Um, I think, however, and when I say however, this is not however to them. I should just say along with, I'm just really happy that they asked me to have this conversation, and we had the conversation. And in the conversation, people were, I guess they were feeling, they were, it meant something, right? Because we're talking about the performance of a cultural expression that was birthed out of a situation that was perpetuated in this space. Yet we're going back to the space, and I think that was the thing for me, because it's like, I don't know, would Jewish people have these have but there's a difference, I guess. I don't know. What I do know is this particular situation, Pinetop Perkins and those folk are not, at least the folks that I spoke with, are not forgetting or omitting or disconnecting the entire story of the blues, or how the blues comes about, because the blues is the roots of American music. Exactly, right, and that's kind of what made it real. I mean, because honestly, I would, and I give this presentation all over, right? I give this presentation all over, and I could have just easily gave the presentation here to you all, right? But usually on Sunday nights, it's an interactive. It's pretty interactive tonight, which I'm happy about, you know. But it wasn't just me giving a presentation. We had a primary source sitting there in the elder Bob Strozier, who is still performing now, still dancing now. And if I'm not mistaken, he jumped off the stage, right? And I will say this too, outside of just thinking about blues ecology as we talk about plantation life and the plantation complex, you also get to learn how to perform. You know, Billy Branch knows how to perform. Bob Strozier knows how to perform. There's a brother out there, Big A. There's so many of these brothers and sisters out there that perform at a high level. I mean, have you seen some of these people? I mean, it's Clarksdale is very interesting as a whole. All of Mississippi, where a lot of the music comes from, or the music celebrated comes from, is interesting as a whole, you know. And I mean, as Black music history comes to a close, we got to think of folk like Pinetop Perkins, Bob Strozier, McKinley Morganfield, Howlin' Wolf, Terry Harmonica Bean, who I speak about all the time, Chris Thomas King, right? Um, and so many others. Because, and I'm trying not to be too, I guess, academic and too reflexive. Um, but I really wanted to rap with y'all about this experience. It wasn't, and you know, I because I wasn't sure how it was going to be taken. You never know how a room that's majority non-blacks on a space that was very harmful to blacks, and then they're celebrating an expression that was cultivated in these type of spaces. You don't know how people will respond, black, white, and everyone in between. You know, there was a young fellow from overseas there. He was an amazing pianist and singer. And his concern he asked about was appropriation, you know. And we didn't even get to appropriation because we really was talking more about the human condition, which is what the blues basically speaks to, even in its celebratory or uh, entertainment space. The blues is about human condition, but we also got to remember there's just so many and when I say variations of the blues, everyone is not thinking about being a tradition bearer who's performing, right? So I use this example a lot. Elijah Cox was a professional musician. Like, he played multiple instruments. He wanted to be a musician rather than continue working in the military and things like this. And you can read more about him in the WPA, Born into Slavery, right? But the purpose I bring him up because regardless to him being a professional musician that's hired to play, you know, on the barracks and things, he's also considered a tradition bearer for the simple fact that he came up learning songs from ex-slaves as he was a Buffalo Soldier. So he learned these songs of old and carried them into the 1900s, you know. But then you have other folk who are actually tradition bearers. But I don't want it to be thought of or come across as if tradition bearers um, did not want to be professional musicians, right? Because a lot of times they were. Yeah, well, you know, I'll tell you something. The irony of that statement is the fact that you had German musicologists saying that the blue notes and the black spiritual notes and the music theory of blues, if you will, was crap or a knockoff of Western. It's, you know, it's amazing. I'm not sure what you're saying, young brother. You know, and it's, you know, I had to refer to my notes. Because again, all this is based on we're coming to a close. And remember, if you want to be reminded, or if you didn't hear early on, we first started the series on Black History Music Month. Go back to the first installment where I give you the context and the story of when Black Music History Month was created, who created it, and I think it had, if I'm not mistaken, the very first one was celebrated with Jimmy Carter, who helped usher it in. You know, and you know, I'll show this image, right? This is a good brother right here, brother Rich. His son is one hell of a harmonica player. His son played with, there he goes right there. My son is right there with David and Bob. On the right side in the middle, that's his son, Jackson. All these young men were great, you know. But this is, the picture on the left of that embrace is after the actual presentation, right? This was at the picture on the right is at the show, right? This picture on the right with me, the elder Bob and Jill, is after the presentation, right? And what I always come away with is you can have a hard conversation without beating people down. I didn't have to go into any form of harsh language, bashing, personal state. And when I say personal statements, the goal is never to be divisive, right? The goal is never to be divisive. The goal is always to give context, right? Yes, young brother. We're excited for you to play the blues with us as well. We're very excited. We're gonna make that happen. Hopefully, we'll link this week. Hey, what's happening, good sister? What's good with you? Always good. Always a pleasure when you're with us. You don't have to beat people down. You know, a lot of people were exploited, given misinformation, and taken advantage of. It just so happens I speak, when I say for my people, I can't even say I speak for them, but I do what I can to give context because there's so much going on, right? Because we're also talking about a part of the country that was Indian territory that some people still feel away when we discuss who's what and what is who and who came from where, or who didn't come from anywhere and was always here. So there's so many things happening. Uh, there's no real absolutes. So that's one reason why I work to never try to be accusatory. Passion is always good, but misdirect passion always sends miscommunication, right? I do, and I say this often. It was really weird and interesting initially to go there the first couple of times. I didn't know how to feel about it, and I remember in one of my classes, I think it was film is ethnomusicology, I think, something like this. And I really was like, I'm not sure how to feel about this. I was, but I do understand the necessity to have these conversations in these spaces. I do believe that the ancestors, even though still alive, have closure, because one of the things I think that is an ongoing issue for me and people like me, right, is there's no closure and we're just jumping to the music without discussing how the music came about in the space. So let me bring you up to speed. I I was discussing as we come to the close of Black Music History Month. I I, I was asked by some good friends and I guess colleagues in the cultural and blues space to give a presentation during the Pinetop Perkins camp. Pinetop Perkins camp, thrown and held by Pinetop Foundation. My youngsters and many other youngsters go there and they get some great experience. Asked me to give a presentation so that patrons, parents, students, and the like could have context of the connections of the blues and the plantation, considering the camp is on a plantation. And so, and the name of, well, I give this presentation around the country, and it's called Blues Music is Black History. It's something I've been doing for some time, um, which has been a little updated, a lot updated since I've been um, building on my new concept, Blues Ecology, which is a part of the blues narrative, So going, I just didn't know, and we've been going to the plantation for a couple of years prior to this happening. Correct. 1000%. You know, and I guess that's why we had to have this conversation to. Well, I don't guess that's why we have to have this conversation. But so to your point, and to get back to what I was saying, there's these. I believe, and I believe some people who kind of feel about it the way I feel about it. Certain conversations have not been had, but we're still kind of trying to push through or go around and have these events and these moments in these spaces without having these conversations. Again, kudos to y'all at Pinetop Perkins. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be part of that. So I'm not speaking about you all. I'm just saying, just how. Well, I am. When I'm speaking about y'all, what I'm saying is, I think one of the greatest things was, it felt like we having that hard conversation, that tough conversation in that space, opened the door and began the process of some kind of closure, right, and reckoning. To now we can move towards just talking or being about the music. But if we don't have those conversations in a lot of these places, then it's really hard to get to just the music, because then it's like, well, there's this big elephant in the room that no one is addressing. What is he singing about? Why is she singing about this? The context behind all these, what we're celebrating. I will definitely do that. I will definitely do that. I appreciate that, and I definitely will do that. Well, I have not been to Africa lately. Um, I I don't know. I think there's a lot of work to do here. Um, there's a lot of work to do here. No, I haven't been to Africa lately. I've been to Mississippi. And Mississippi got a spot called New Africa. I've been there. I've been to Louisiana. I've been to Alabama, Georgia. I've been to those places, right? But I have not been to Ghana or Africa, these places, I've been to Tennessee, right? I've been there. Well, there's some people that I can't say I have mixed feelings about UNESCO. I've read about them, but I've never really dealt with them. But I'm going to take your suggestion and advice and look into some things because of what we're doing. And we're doing some what I believe is good work, and I'm happy to have great people to do the work with. Don't forget, look into this, okay? Contact me if you want it. For those of you that are on Patreon with me, you are and you're a paid member, you're already accessible to that, okay? You can also contact me for this, okay? And I want to shout out this brother right here, Mr. Hal, blues legend, who actually decided to stay just to hear the presentation. And he said something that stuck with me. He said, "You know something, brother? You referred to the Mr. Strozier as the elder." He said, "I don't think I can ever call him anything other than the elder again." And that touched me, because I don't think a lot of this is not intentional. We get around each other, with musicians, with this, with that, and we just get to talking. But Mr. Strozier is the elder. I mean, hell, Billy, don't get mad at me, but you the elder too, man. But what we were talking about the ladies, Lady A, Deetra Farr, Carla Robinson. These folk have not just been around, but performed with, the folk we're calling ancestors and legends. The folks that had instrumental contributions in stapling our cultural expression. There are folks walking around that took part in that with them. Every time I get the opportunity to speak to or message Deetra Farr, I call her the scene. She is the scene. She is the scene. Right? These folk should be memorialized. You know what I'm saying? Well, yes, absolutely. So I don't know when you jumped on, but first, yes. Secondly, the reason why I began to answer like that is because when I was again, when we were having this discussion, when I was giving this presentation, I was blessed, honored, and lucky enough to have the elder Bob Strozier sit right next to me as a primary source of someone who grew up and worked on a plantation and being a blues musician, not only back then, but currently at 94, 95 years old, right? Forgive me if you heard that. I just kicked the mic, right? And so one of the things he was saying was, we don't want to talk about politics and all this stuff because these people have been working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and they're coming to forget about all that stuff. So he said his job was to make them, for those 2 hours or however long, have a good time and forget about all that stuff. So so I bring that up again to answer your question. There is a time and a place. There's, everyone is not the I guess the folk singer or the cultural bearer that Like if if I'm performing, I talk about this while I perform, but that's just because that's the space that I'm in as a, I guess, educator, right? But then, there's folks that, like the elder Stroger said, he's not trying to do that. However, in song and music, in song and lyric, we could poke fun at those real situations in a way that continues to entertain and make those who don't want to think about it feel good about it for the moment. So absolutely there was, and I wouldn't even say in some all cases secret code, right? Some cases it was blatant humorous poetry. You could think about burlesques. You could think about Storyville. You could think about vaudeville medicine shows and even minstrels, where they I like cold though, but they utilized different kind of lyrics to call these things out. But there's also um protest songs and revolutionary songs that were blues that in some cases, whether it was a joke or not, they use coded language, right? So I'll give you an example. Talking to, and what you guys can go see uh, a series I did some years ago. I think I only did 2 or 3 episodes, and if you want to see that back, um, I always take sponsors and funding. It was a video series. Um, I was able to interview the late great Leo Bud Welch, and also a legend in his own right, and a legacy of a legend, Guy Davis, aka Kokomo Kid. I bring him up because in that interview, he says to me, a lot of time you hear the blues musician talk about his woman or his mule or one of these things, but he's written it to where ears that are not supposed to be hearing would think he's talking about his woman or his mule, but he's actually talking about his boss or whatever have you, right? So absolutely, right? I have a song, Use Blues. So I'm talking, it's a political song, but you know, you think I'm talking about a woman. You know what I mean? That's part of blues tradition, you know? Yeah, John the Revelator is a great song. I happen to love it by Son House, but also Blind Willie Jefferson has a great rendition. If I'm not mistaken, that might be the one you're talking about. And Blind Willie is a masterful, um, was a masterful blues musician, who suffered a very, very harsh fate. Um, No, thank you, Slim, for rocking with me. Thank you for rocking with me. Um, I'm pausing because I'm thinking about how Blind Willie Jefferson died, right? Because he was kind of living in a space like he was squatting. Um, and he had caught pneumonia or something like this. And I mean, you know, and this goes back to why this conversation was necessary. If you think about how somebody's, and I'm not talking about these legend deaths like Robert Johnson and all this. I'm talking about folk who died for a lack of insurance, folk who died because of a lack of being able to get medical care, folk who died because of lack of being able to have proper living conditions. Black folk, right? I think I don't know if I shared this with y'all, but um some good colleagues, friends, and folk out in Brownsville, Tennessee, invited me out to give a talk like this, right? And but this time it wasn't about blues music being Black history. I spoke about the African American folklorist platform, as well as, oh yeah, you know I'm going for it, kid. Oh, I thought I had a picture of the new magazine. But anyway, I spoke about the African American folklorist, right? And after I spoke, because they had a program, and after the program ended, LJ Sammy comes with me everywhere, right? Absolutely. LJ and Sammy come with me everywhere, so they came with me. So afterward, and so mind you, they celebrate Tina Turner. I believe she's from there, and Sleepy John Estates, right? And that's right. And oh man, I don't even want to get to Buddy Bolden right now. Particularly, we're going to talk about him later at another show. But anyway, Sleepy John Estates, right? So on at this the Delta Cultural Center, I think it's called. Let me make sure. Let me find the name of this place. And shout out to my folk there in Brownsville, Tennessee, right? uh Delta Cultural. There's a few cultural centers that's called the Delta Cultural. Okay, no, the Delta Cultural Center is in Helena, and that's the one I want to shout out also. But that's not the one I'm talking about. Brownsville, Tennessee. You know I'm looking it up while okay. Yeah, it is. It's the West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center. Okay, so the Delta Cultural Center is the one in Helena, Arkansas, right across from Clarksdale, right? And they do great work, by the way. And they asked me to come. I was supposed to go on the radio, but I couldn't make it there. But I'm going to get down there to y'all as soon as possible. But I'm talking about West Tennessee Delta Heritage Center, okay? And this is in Brownsville, Tennessee, okay? Great spot, right? Great spot. Great folk that worked there, everything. And so they had a program going. They invited me to come speak, and I went out there. I drove down there, not far, and then I spoke about African American folklore, right? Then I met some great people, played a little guitar, sang a bit, and then we went out around, to look at the grounds, right? Because they honor Tina Turner and they honor Sleepy John Estates and a few other folks, right? I'm probably saying his name wrong. Forgive me. So, and I got footage of me there. So me, my son and daughter walk over to Sleepy John's. I want to call it, well, his quarters where he lived. Okay, and we walked in, looked around, and it was smaller than a bathroom, and I mean like a very small bathroom. Like when you walk into when you walk to a bathroom and you can't even turn around. Very small space that he lived in. So I go back inside. I was, talking to I think the director or something. And she's explaining to me, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe he lived in there. And blah, we were talking about it. And she said, yeah, and I was like, I'm quite apologetic because I was like, I'm not trying to. I'm just very taken aback, you know. And she said, no, 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 no. You're actually quite calm about this conversation. I said, oh, there's people that's not calm about this conversation. And she said, CP John did a tour overseas, right? So these folk from overseas, I believe France or somewhere in Europe, they're still humongous fans of him, which I'm not surprised, right? But the point I'm making is that they're still such humongous fans of his. They fly from wherever they're at overseas to Brownsville, Tennessee to see where he lived. And when they, excuse me, when they get to see his home or where he used to live, that little bathroom-sized space that he lived in, they are livid. They're like, how dare America have someone like this living in a place like that? And it's like, that's the blues. And this is why it was so important to have the hard conversation at Hopson Plantation about the blues. But it was what really solidified and made it better was to have a primary source sitting right there, having a conversation with us, and then opening the floor up to parents, to students, to those that work there, and those that are part of the Pinetop Perkins Foundation. And so we had a nice collective organic conversation. I wouldn't say a Q&A. And I wouldn't say it's healing. I would say it's the beginning stages. We're working towards healing. Speaking of healing, we got to shout out Sister Chandra Williams and the brother she brought by, who's an old school musician. I'm going to contact you, bro. Because they're into healing as well at the Crossroads Cultural Center, right? Which is on I think it's Delta Alley. You know, yeah. So it's like, now you're asking the real question, good brother. Now you're asking the real question. That's So there's a couple of things, right? First, how do we get black blues musicians, and then how do we get acoustic musicians on the main stage? Because sometimes a pre-war blues, acoustic blues, is treated like a novelty, you know. But that's what I'm trying to find out. I'm working with some good folks on establishing some new festivals up and coming. Um, but that's the $1 million question. Well, you know something? One answer I have: black parents. I'm not knocking you. Don't get mad at me. I'm not knocking you whatsoever. I would say though, just like we spend money for our sons and daughters to go to sports camps and all this, we can spend that money so that they can go to music camps if you're not doing it already. And blues camps is really a great place for black kids to go, because blues is not slave music, first and foremost, even though this particular one's on the plantation and what we're discussing. But you know something? We can't heal if we keep either acting like it didn't happen, or if we keep acting, well, I don't want to know about that, F that, or whatever. We have to heal too. And we have to have ownership of our sound and our tradition, even though it's shared, right? I would love to see, and where do you think hip hop come from? Like Howlin' Wolf was talking about, he wore his 44 so long, his shoulder was so, you know? And then you got folk like, what's homegirl's name? I keep her music up right here that I always keep forgetting. I'm gonna tell you right now. What is homegirl's name? Well, we know Ma Rainey, right? But that's not who I always forget. Here we go. Thank you. Lucille Bogan. And now she goes by several names. Clara Smith got some stuff too. Julia Lee. So there's a real connection to hip hop from the blues, right? I mean, you can look at Josephine Baker, these were blues people, and we got blues people now. But if we get some of our folk here, Oh yeah, it is. And Billy Branch is a great teacher. He taught. Uh, he was teaching my son and so many other young musicians. You know what I'm saying? Um, yes, he still does do that, to my understanding. But to answer your question, yeah, one of the things is to introduce them at a younger age, have resources so young black kids can go to these programs. Don't be afraid to go to these programs and learn the history of it. Now, mind you, I have to be honest, and I'm not right now. I'm definitely not talking about Pinetop Perkins Foundation, but in other spaces, black folk don't feel welcomed. I only know that because that's what was shared to me. I interview a lot of people. I do a lot of field work and interviewing people, and I speak to folk. I want to know what's going on in the blues. Why, what's this, what's that, So as we work towards, and you know, here's something also true. Unless I'm not saying anyone here is doing that. I'm saying I'm not blaming anyone. I notice a lot of people try to maybe shift the blame somewhere as if they think it's, you know what I'm saying? With the discussion around TikTok, I've discovered that many black Americans under the age of 60 blues. That's the problem. I'm disturbed by that too. I was just telling someone how people used to say, "Why am I playing slave music?" Someone even said to my wife, "Why is your husband doing slave music?" And then good friends of mine, really good friends of mine that are great musicians, they were going to perform at a black space, and they were introduced as the band that was playing music from Roots. I will never understand that, but then again, no, I'm actually I do understand it because some I don't even call it an indoctrination. So many things happen. This goes back to healing. This goes back to having the hard conversations. I agree with you, brother Brian. I agree with you. Listen, if you all want to get behind Jack Dappa Blues as we work with different organizations to put together some festivals, get behind us. I'm working on a festival right now to honor Porter Parish Granger, and I hate to say I'm working on it because I don't. It's not about me. Never about me. You know. But I'm trying to work with people on that. Get behind us. Help us. Sponsor something. Sponsor a stage. Sponsor an artist. Sponsor a workshop. Get in contact with me. Let me know how you can sponsor. You know what I'm saying? Well, I mean, you're in Memphis, bro. But I'll tell you later on when we meet because I'm not far from Memphis. But there's no you're in Memphis. That's like saying in Philly or in Detroit. You have to know this about Memphis. You know what I'm saying? I don't know about these other cities. I talk about this often, right? This particular, I think it's called Soul Food, and I bring it up often, and the she she writes about how the migrants was treated and how folks who assimilated did not wish to remember. And then there's a book I have over here on, or did I bring it over here back here? Yeah, this book right here. You know, there are black folk that did not want to remember. You know what I mean? Same thing with the early days of hip hop. You know, so there's black folk, there's white folk, and everyone in between. You know, Because we also have to remember it's a class thing as well. It's a socioeconomic thing as well. It's a political thing as well. And this goes back to, and I see you, CC, let me get to this. It goes back to why it was imperative to have the hard conversation at Hopson Plantation about the blues, because, again, most people shy away from the blues because of the conversation it brings up. Because most people don't want to have the conversation of Jim Crow, of exploitation labor, exploited labor practices, lynching, land removal, right? All this goes with the blues. You know, leaving your family to go 10, 20 states away to work. All this has to do with the blues. Oh, and I didn't even mention the Trail of Tears. That's the blues. People keep talking about the freedmen, but you have to know who's Black American, who's Afro-Indigenous, with hoodoo making a comeback in popularity among younger Black Americans. Hopefully blues can ride that way. Yeah, and it's ironic you say that, because hoodoo, Pentecost, Southern Black Church outside of Baptist and Methodist is deeply ingrained with hoodoo and blues. I dig it. But I don't know when you feel what. I didn't get the last part of the statement, young Don. All right. You gotta love it. I love the blues. And so, man, this is what a great way to send off Black Music History Month, with not just talking about the blues, but talking about the cultural relevance that creates the blues, the tradition that creates the blues, the human experience that creates the blues, socioeconomic issues, justice and injustices, which we really didn't talk about, but tonight, and we really didn't talk too much about that at Hopson, right? A lot of these things were kind of brought up, and I would give context, but then I would turn to the elder, and then I would ask him a question about those things, but how he how where he can give us a firsthand account with his experience to the information that I was providing, and it was just it was masterful, because a lot of times this information is either, someone has PowerPoint and they're not trying to talk at you, but they're talking at you and they're showing you quotes and images, and or you're reading it or this or that. It was really something to be able to have the elder sit there, ask him some questions, and then we talk amongst each other. And when I say amongst each other, the audience, and we all can have this dialogue. And I'm kind of familiar with doing that, because at the New Amsterdam Musical Association, NAMA Harlem, we used to do something called Blues and Poetry, which was one Sunday every month. And what we would do is people could come workshop what they're working on. Blues musicians and poets, and we would get in there and have kind of like a church. And when I say like a church, we would perform new songs we were working on. Some people performed. I don't call it covers when they're playing traditional Black public domain songs. I personally don't consider that a cover. I consider that culture bearing, right? Preserving. And then you have folks that will come in and they will do poetry. Then you have some where they'll play some, somebody will play some music, or a few musicians will come and play some music, and they'll read. There's one brother my brother Robert, and he would his poetry came out like hoot and hollering, pastoring, you know. But as we had these epic and very dynamic performances, there were grassroots, ground level conversations being had in a space about, and this is why blues ecology is really significant, because where we were, just like at Hopson, where we were having this program in Nama Harlem at this point easily I think is 130 years old, right? And this is a brownstone that was purchased in the same around the time Pinetop Perkins was born. Prior to that, they had an office downtown Manhattan on Broadway because it was a colored musicians union. New Amsterdam Musical Association was a colored musician union started by African American, Afro Cubano, and I forgot if the other person was another African American or Afro Latino or African. I forget, right? And because back then in the 1800s, at least around the after 1850s, if nothing else, based on my memory, you could not play professionally if you was a part of a union, and they were not allowing black, brown, and colored folk into the union. So these three musicians got together in New York and created the New Amsterdam Musical Association, which was the very first colored musicians union in the United States. The one that followed was the Colored Musicians Union, which is up in Buffalo. Thank you, young brother. I appreciate you coming through, right? So what happens is they buy a brownstone in Harlem, and it becomes like a space, almost like for those of you who know the Southern Queen here in Bowling Green. So what happens is New Amsterdam Musical Association. This brownstone becomes a speakeasy in the basement, and then it becomes a place where black musicians, when they're coming out to play, they can stay there in Harlem. And this is before and during the Renaissance, when they're playing the Cotton Club and all these places, but can't stay nowhere. So they would go play all these places, then they would all go up to Nama Harlem, which was I think on it was 130 something and Lennox, if I'm not mistaken. I forget. It's been a minute, right? And I mean, they would go in there, they would play, and there's rooms up there, and they would sleep. It was a brownstone. So Jelly Roll Martin stayed there. Okay, let me just say that again. Jelly Roll Martin stayed there. Okay, excuse me. So and a bunch of others, right? Ella Fitzgerald, all of these people, you know. So the reason why I'm comparing this to what happened at Hopson, because we had these organic conversations as we all were performing our original pieces, our preservation pieces, or what have you, and they were not pre-planned conversations. They were not pre-planned Q&As, right? It just kind of happened based on whatever the vibe or whatever performance happened may have evoked something that in the space it transcends the moment. This is blues ecology. Pay attention. What do I mean by it transcends the moment? Well, something is evoked that brings generations together, dimensions together, multiple times and spaces together in that one space. And when those things met, we had quorum, forum, church, however you want to call it. And so a piece of that kind of happened at Hopson, as we discussed why you have to know about the participation of the plantation to the blues people and to the creation of blues music. You see what I'm saying? Did you receive it? Did you receive it? Let me know if you all received it. I couldn't help it. So I just want to show you again. This is how it looked at one time. This is how it looks now. And we thank you, Elder. We thank you, Elder. We also thank the Elder Bob Strozier and all those who give their time to communities to learn this stuff. But I implore Black parents to introduce your children to the blues and allow them to play the music. I could tell some rappers. I could tell when folk listen to the blues or deep Dixie, or I wouldn't call it Dixie. Let me rephrase that. New Orleans music. you know, the Chicago blues, there's Texas blues, the St. Louis blues, there's Oklahoma blues, which rest in peace, Miss Selby, who she teaches me. Uh, Oklahoma blues is based off hot box blues, right? Don't thank y'all for rocking with me as per usual. Go back, remember, listen to this interview with the Honorable Dr. Katrina Hazard, who wrote the book Mojo Workin', Hoodoo Blues and the Black Belt Tradition. She also wrote Jukin', okay? Go listen to some Reuben Lacey, okay? Go listen to some Mance Lipscomb. Go listen to some Tommy Johnson. Go listen to some Jontavius Willis. Go listen to some Marquise Knox. Go listen to some Little Rel. Go listen to some Piedmont Blues acoustic duo. Go listen to some Veronica Jackson, America's blues and folk singer. Go listen to some Don Flemings. All right. Go listen to some Chris Thomas King. He got some new music out and a new book out. Hell, go listen to Jack Dappa Blues. You heard me. All right, good folk. Thank y'all for bluesing with me. As you know, we will be back next week, same blues time, same blues station. We are still trying to work out this online blues station where we'll be able to play music while we're having this conversation. Again, if you have not joined the Patreon, also subscribe to the YouTube page, but join the Patreon. If you can go to the Patreon, it's going to look like this. You'll be privy to this podcast, which I just dropped a new one. And in that new podcast of Jack Dapper Blues Reflexive Podcasts, the one I just dropped, you can get a copy of this if you're a paid member. And you can only listen to that if you're a paid member, okay? Get our merch. Blues Music is Black History. We have t-shirts, mugs, and hoodies. You can listen to us on Spotify. The magazine is out. Contact me if you want to buy a copy. Contact me if you want to buy bulk. Go to the website. Get involved. Okay? We have programs. We're building communities, and the communities we build, we hope to give the tools to, so you can go out in your own communities, collect, document, and you have a place for it to be a repository at. You have a place for it to live at, right? You have a home. You can go check that one out too. That's the podcast I did a couple of years ago. You have a home. Jack Dappa Blues, African American folklorist. All right. Once again, have a good week. Do what you can to forgive. Always start from where you at and keep them blues rocking. All praise the Most High, y'all. See y'all next week.